How about it for John Rothmann, everybody? John Rothmann, welcome.
Well, and I want you to note, I am not wearing my headphones either, because my computer is set up this way.
This is outrageous. It really is.
It just goes, if you'll pardon a bad pun, you can do it.
There we go. I got it. I got it. Because these are called cans, the original, yeah. I don't know why, because we have so many sounds and different elements here, we were outfitted with this originally, but maybe it has outlived its usefulness. It's a radio thing, too. You know, we came from the radio, and so maybe it was a holdover from that.
Would you feel better if I put my cans on?
I can't possibly feel better than I already feel, John, so don't worry about it. I am so excited to talk to you on the day after the New Hampshire primary, where Donald Trump, predictably, I think on some level, was dominant. How dominant was he, and is there a way to handicap Nikki Haley's future based on the results?
There's never been anything like it, if I can quote Donald Trump.
There's never been anything like this.
Yeah.
Look,
he's not wrong if he gets a nomination early. I mean, like this, if he becomes the presumptive nominee, he's not wrong about there never being anything like it in recent memory, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Anyway, you go. Sorry.
So Donald Trump's victory is no surprise. It was a 10-point spread. Nikki Haley is going into her own state of South Carolina, and all the polls show her losing. All the key elected officials in the state of South Carolina have endorsed Trump. It's over. She may not know it's over, but I think the observation is correct. If something happens to Donald Trump, and this is a real question between now and the convention, who would be eligible to receive delegate votes? And the reason that campaigns are suspended and not ended is because you can still compete. But my fantasy is that there is an open convention. That is to say that if Donald Trump were not around for any number of reasons, legal, medical, whatever the case may be, you would then have an open convention, and that would really be incredible. But the reality is it's over. Donald Trump will be the nominee of the Republican Party, and that's the reality. And Nikki Haley will be a footnote to history.
Wow. I mean, well, people are saying how embarrassing for Nikki Haley. Nikki got a lot of independent voters. Was there, in the ashes of the whole thing, some way that you can discern how voters might lean in a general election, Trump and Biden?
Oh, Biden is going to win. It's very clear, because all you have to do is take a look at the number of people in the CNN polls and the Fox polls, all the polls, who said they won't vote for Trump under any circumstances. So I don't see a path to victory for Trump. The real challenge will be if Trump is nominated and loses the election or wins, what will the Republican Party do? They'll be out from underneath Donald Trump. If he wins, he's a lame duck, and lame ducks generally have a very tough time. And the second aspect is, if he loses, the Republican Party will no longer have Donald Trump to deal with, at least not as a potential candidate. Although, as somebody pointed out to me, he could run in 2028 again. So, I mean, only if he loses, by the way. You can't have a third term. So it's very interesting. It's a real challenge for the Republican Party. It's a tragedy. It's an American tragedy, and it will be written about that way in years ahead.
It's an American tragedy because it reflects a broken electorate, a broken populace?
No, a broken Republican Party.
Okay.
I don't think the American electorate is broken. I think
they're the ones supporting it. I mean, why? But you're saying it rots from the head type thing.
Yeah, sure. It's Republican voters. Why does Trump have a clear path to the nomination? Let's assume for a minute that Nikki Haley wins in South Carolina. It's not going to happen, but let's assume she did. What's her path to nomination? Take a look at the states. The states are solid Trump states. They're not Nikki Haley states. You can't campaign for Super Tuesday in a broad general sense. It's not like Iowa or New Hampshire where you go in and you press the flesh, as we used to say. So I think that the tragedy for the Republican Party and for America is that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee for president. And by the way, can you imagine Ronna Romney McDaniel, the national chair of the Republican Party, basically saying to Nikki Haley, it's over. Donald Trump is our nominee. Let's unify. It's very disturbing all the way around. Particularly for me, I'm teaching a class on the making of the president 2024. When I go into class next week, what am I going to say to people? It's over. No, there'll be a lot to talk about. But
Well,
nomination.
I mean, I think one thing you can talk about, I mean, I know you don't lack for things to talk about, but, you know, I think it was pointed out here in the chat. Two things were pointed out I want to double back and follow up on. One was that she kind of blew it. It was suggested by not going after him more aggressively in the early going and sort of waiting. And by the time, this is a criticism, as you know, of Ron DeSantis as well, that he was so busy kissing butt or avoiding Trump in any sort of insulting fashion or speaking of him in any sort of derisive way that he ended up letting Trump grow too big to be taken down.
They're all afraid of Donald Trump. You
right,
antagonize the Trump base. You cannot win the election. You cannot unify the party.
I get it. That's why they did it. So my question is then, is that if you had been their advisor, would you have said, you got to go after him right away? We're getting in and you got to go after him right away.
Well, look, I don't like Donald Trump, so I would say take off the gloves and do everything you can. But if you are a candidate for president of the United States in the Republican Party, you have to consider the fact that in order to run a competitive race for president, you can't alienate the base. I mean, it's just that simple. It's a conundrum that we face in dealing with practical politics.
No, but conundrum's a ding word. But I'm not so sure, John, then, if by extension then, but your logic, why are you running at all? I mean, you're going to alienate the base by running.
Oh, why do you think they're running? It's ego.
Oh,
they all want to be president of the United States. And that's a very simple fact. Now,
and you got to play the game, though. I mean,
they are. They're playing the game. If Donald Trump stumbled and went out, they could always say, "Oh, we never attacked Donald Trump." The base will still come along with me. What was Ron DeSantis running as? He was running as a Trump light, if you will.
Well, he's running as the new, he kept saying Trump's lost something off his fastball. Same thing was happening with Garvey the other night. He wasn't wanting to insult Trump. How about this from Randy? Biden only won 4 or 5 swing states in 2020 by 50,000 or so votes. Biden winning is not a done deal. John Rothmann?
Okay, think about the number of people who under no circumstances will vote for Donald Trump. Take a look at all the polls. And I can tell you that anyone who runs against Donald Trump, it's not voting for, it's voting against. There are more people who will vote against Donald Trump than you can imagine. And in order to carry swing states, you've got to carry those people. Could something change? Of course it could. But remember, we have a man who's been indicted in 91 different cases, 4 different areas of indictment, and a man who, frankly, I don't see his path to victory. And I think the Republicans understand it. Why do you think Republicans in the Senate hung back for so long? They don't have a choice now, although I hasten to point out Mitch McConnell has not made a comment. By the way, there's another point. Who will Donald Trump select as his vice presidential nominee? Well, let me point out Ron DeSantis cannot be the nominee because he is from Florida and so is Donald Trump. Remember the precedent of Dick Cheney, who was registered to vote in Texas, had to shift to Wyoming in order to be the vice presidential nominee. And those of you who were listening in KGO in those days, why was I one of the first to point out that Dick Cheney would be the nominee? Because I pointed out his switch in voter registration. What about having someone like Governor Haley? Well, Trump doesn't want her. He's got a host of people he can take, including Elise Stefanik, who is my number 1 on the list of potential vice presidential candidates. Number 3 Republican in the House of Representatives, a woman. She replaced Liz Cheney. She has great gravitas. It's a perfect match in a way. Trump is still talking about Carrie Lake. There are a variety of women who he could put on the ticket. And of course, Tim Scott can no longer be accused of being gay. He's getting married. He's engaged. And that may put him center stage.
But he is getting married to Donald Trump, right?
Well,
yes.
I love that. You deserve credit.
That's his first love, isn't it? Yes, I thought that. No one.
And he said that in his comment. You must hate Nikki Haley, and the response was, "No, I love Donald Trump." Maybe Albert can find that and play it.
Maybe his vow to his wife will be something along the lines of, Donald is my first love, but you are a close second, darling. Not
a great way to begin a marriage.
The question as to Donald Trump's mental acuity He seems to be slipping.
Oh, excuse me. What did you say your name was again?
Confused his Republican primary opponent, Nikki Haley, with former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Who are you?
He claimed Haley was in charge of security during the January 6th attack on the Capitol, that she refused all of his offers of help. Haley, of course, she was his own UN ambassador. She wasn't in office, and she wasn't even in Washington on January 6th. Apparently, at his rally this past Saturday night in Manchester, he didn't address the Haley-Pelosi mix-up, but assured his supporters that he took a cognitive test and he, quote, "I aced it." He previously boasted of his ability to identify an image of a whale on an assessment. I mean, again, I don't know.
It's a whale of a tale.
There you go. So, but as you stack these things together, you can do it with Biden as well. But Biden's slips, and if you want to look at his impairment as far as speaking is concerned, it dates back to the fact that he was a stutterer. And I don't mean to make excuses for an older man. You can lose it, and I think both these guys have lost his step. But Donald Trump, it suggested, has really kind of stepped off the curb. He's unable to really distinguish world leaders. The Turkish leader from the Hungarian leader, Nikki Haley from Nancy Pelosi.
He remembers Hungary's leader. He quotes him. He says that's the kind of leader he wants to be. But Mark, I didn't mean to interrupt you before, and I apologize for that. But I couldn't figure out whether it was on the Ron Owens show, the Gil Gross show. Who are you?
Right. So if you're saying if you get to that point, you're
in big trouble. And
right.
But let me explain. And I said it before, and I know I got a lot of criticism for it. Donald Trump's people are in a cult. They will not admit to any failure. But the simple truth is that Donald Trump is not the same person that he was 10 years ago. But then again, I've known Joe Biden through the years. He isn't the same as he was either.
Exactly. And I'm sure that there are those watching going, come on, you guys are doing the same thing. You're making excuses for your guy because you're in the cult of whatever, of Joe Biden or of the Democrats or the anti-Trump cult, whatever they call it.
It applies both sides. It's very clear. And cognitive awareness when you're president of the United States is critical. You can make slip-ups. Yeah. You and I have made slip-ups, and you make slip-ups. But Donald Trump can't even admit he made a slip-up, and that's a problem too.
The fact is he's covered by journalists the same way they covered him in the 2016 election, John. I don't think there's been any kind of profound evolution from a media standpoint of the way Donald Trump has been covered. The document case, which has sort of been parked, to me is still the biggest sort of slam dunk from a Q&A standpoint. Why, sir, did you take so many documents that you were filling a bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, a ballroom at Mar-a-Lago, your office, a bedroom, a closet, et cetera? You're waving them around. I mean, shouldn't we be troubled by that? Mark, I'd at least like to see that. Ask him about his Supreme Court appointments.
Mark, it's very clear you don't like Donald Trump. I understand that. And that's why I discount everything you say. Do you understand that's what it's going to come down to?
I see.
Facts aren't going to matter. Don't confuse people with the facts is something I've said many times. The people who support Donald Trump will support him no matter what. What's tragic, and let's put Trump aside, is the Republican Party. I've been in the Republican Party over the years and seen great fights that benefited the country, as we've seen in the Democratic Party. Great fights. We don't see any fights in the Republican Party. They're marching in lockstep. And even members of the United States Senate and the House of Representatives who were critical of Donald Trump are now excusing what happened on January 6th. They're all important issues. They are all critical issues. But it seems not to matter to people who are committed to voting for Donald Trump. Question is, if something happens to Donald Trump between now and the convention, what happens then? How will the party choose its candidate? And the only thing I could think of is there would be an open convention. And we haven't had an open convention since 1952 when Adlai Stevenson was nominated by the Democrats.
Something happened. This is apart from I think you've made, your points well on this issue of the presidential election. Something happened at the end of last year. There were bills introduced to Congress to essentially prevent the Medicare pay cut from going into effect. It's a 3.3% pay cut, and then I think there's a 2.5% pay cut on top of that. This is when I say pay cut, this is the cut that would go to doctors for treating people with Medicare coverage. Congress adjourned before even taking up that bill that would have prevented those Medicare cuts from going into effect. Could you comment on that?
Listen, talk about a do-nothing Republican Congress, to quote Harry Truman. He talked about the good-for-nothing 80th Congress. We can talk about the good-for-nothing Congress that exists now. The Republicans are paralyzed. They have not produced anything for their voters. And I would point out to you, Speaker Johnson hangs by a thread. He's got a revolt on the right in the Freedom Caucus. So what can I tell you? The Congress is completely unproductive. And if I were Joe Biden, if I were managing Joe Biden's campaign, I would talk about that good-for-nothing Republican Congress, and I'd explain their problems. But let me point out to you, even people like Congresswoman Chase, even people like Elise Stefanik, people who have at various times been somewhat critical of Trump, they're all in line. And that's what's scary to me. That's the real issue. And,
I think John, I think we're so personality driven, you know, Trump, Biden, it's all personality. It feels like a high school presidential, you know, student body election.
That's the way presidential campaigns. That's the way presidential campaigns are run.
And that's why this is a broken system, and that's why you need journalism. But even journalists, you need journalists to bring up this Medicare thing. You need these policies that are really relevant to people's lives. You need Medicare, that brought up.
The Supreme Court, the immigration issue. I can go down the list of all of the issues that should be discussed. Yesterday in my podcast, I went through a whole series of foreign policy issues which are being completely ignored by the press. And that's why I really feel it's a tragic moment for us in more ways than one. But again, I would only remind you, who is president of the United States matters. A president is the decisive factor on all of these issues. And by the way, it would help if you had a functional Congress. We clearly don't have a functional Congress. And I think that's the reason why the Democrats will probably take control of the House and the Senate. Although the numbers may not reflect it, I think there is such outrage. Look at the question of reproductive rights for women. We just had the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, 51 years. I think there's going to be a backlash come November that will stun the Republicans. People say to me,
certainly there was in the midterm.
Yeah, and there will be again. Yeah. This is such a critical issue. And by the way, did you hear the president and the vice president speaking about this yesterday in their first real joint appearance together? It was powerful. And if you're watching the ads that are being produced on the question of a woman's reproductive rights, it's remarkably powerful. So will all of that resonate? Will it make a difference? And that goes back to what happened in New Hampshire. The die-hard Trump people put Trump across the line. But Trump was wrong. He said he always carries New Hampshire. He didn't carry New Hampshire in the last election. And I'm going to point out to you, that is going to be the reaction universally, because what we know is, Richard Nixon once told me, you want to win a Republican primary, you run to the right. You want to win a Democratic primary, you run to the left. You want to win the election, the person who gets to the center first wins. And Donald Trump is incapable, in my mind, of getting to the center. And certainly his record is such that I don't think it'll work. One other quick point: the Supreme Court is going to be a major issue in this campaign. I've been saying this now for some weeks, but they have some critical decisions to make, and one of the most important will be the question of Donald Trump's claim last week of immunity on all questions when he was president of the United States. I don't believe the Supreme Court can affirm immunity, but if they did, I can assure you that would be a campaign issue. And if they don't, it'll be a campaign issue as well. So there's a lot riding on what happens in November, and that's the reason why, and we were talking about this earlier, Kim and I, on the question of progressives who say they will not vote for Biden. I have to tell you, I believe honestly, when you have two major candidates on the ballot, Biden or Trump, those progressives are going to turn out. They would dread a Trump presidency.
Well, they didn't turn out in 2016 for him, John. They didn't.
No, but this is not 2016. Roe v. Wade has been rescinded. Look at there's so many issues that have happened.
Okay. So you're saying the progressives, that is the further left or farther left part, whatever it's further or farther out there on the left, they're going to be essentially shocked by what they've back in to getting to the ballot box and holding their nose and voting for Biden.
Exactly. And we can talk about third parties at another time, and I know we will as things move forward. The danger of a third party is not that they win an election. The last third party to win a presidential election was the Republican Party in 1860 with Abraham Lincoln. The danger is they become spoilers, as we saw in Florida in the year 2000, where both the Pat Buchanan vote and the vote for Nader prevented Gore from carrying that state.
Well, and of course, the Supreme Court is what prevented Gore. Gore won that election, and in, I think, 6 or 7 different independent investigations and counts and all these different ways that they counted with the Chads, without the Chads, et cetera, Gore won it. But Gore conceded, and the Supreme Court said, stop counting. We know that story. We can talk about another time.
I'm pointing out, the Supreme Court was an issue then. It will be an issue now.
Yes, sir. I mean, and sadly, because to note something else you just said a couple of minutes ago, because Congress is a do-nothing place right now, and Congress can only get so much through, it goes to the courts, and you have even more power conferred to the Supreme Court than there would be otherwise.
And that's why this question of immunity, you were talking about the case of all the confidential, classified documents Trump took. The real question for me is, how far does presidential immunity extend? If Trump does not have immunity, if he can't gain that, he's in big trouble. And he knows it.
I love our time together, but sadly, it has come to an end. You can find John on the John Rothmann podcast. It's called Around the Political World with John Rothmann. You can also find him all across the KGO hosts who used to be on KGO. John pops in regularly on Nikki's show and here. So, but we love you.
Say, you have big news about the number of people subscribing. I do want you to know I had big news this morning. We now have 140,000 downloads on Around the Political World with John Rothmann. But I want to say it one more time. You must support what Mark Thompson is doing. I don't charge for my podcast at this point, but in order to sustain the wonderful work that Mark does, that Nikki does, you have to subscribe. You have to support it.
Well, subscribing is free here on YouTube, and wherever you are, giving us a thumbs up is free. But yeah, we support people here. You know, Kim and Albert and Tony and myself. You know, there are salaries.
And I'm willing to waive my exorbitant salary.
I was willing to double your. I was going to double your exorbitant salary. So there you go.
Well, may I say, it's always a pleasure, and I want to thank Albert, and I want to thank Kim McAllister. And Kim, I apologize for bumping you from the news. In my book, you are always at the top of every list.
Oh, wow. You can bump me anytime, baby.
Man, I'll tell you what, this thing's getting too hot. I don't know what.
Weren't we just talking about in the heat of the night?
Yeah.
My bad. I'm sorry.
John Rothmann, everybody. Thank you, John.
Hi, guys. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye now.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.